Commander Veshtari stood before the Galactic Council chamber with her four crests held high in determination and confidence that bordered on arrogance, which was typical for her species, the Kalathi, who had never lost a war in their 10,000 years of recorded history and didn't plan to start. Now the holographic display behind her showed the dark patch of space that every spacefaring civilization had learned to avoid for the past 3 centuries since humanity had made first contact with the galaxy and then promptly sealed their borders without explanation or further communication of any kind. 327 ships. Veshtari announced to the assembled delegates from across known space, her voice carrying the weight of countless lost crews and unanswered questions that haunted every military academy and strategic planning committee in the galaxy. 327 expeditions sent into human territory over 3 centuries, and not one has ever returned to tell us what happened to them or what the humans are hiding behind their impenetrable borders. The Vexian ambassador, a floating jellyfish-like creature who communicated through bioluminescent pulses that the translation matrices converted into understandable language, flickered with patterns that indicated skepticism mixed with curiosity about the proposal that Veshtari was about to make to the council. They destroyed themselves. The Vexian pulsed. Some catastrophic war or plague or technological disaster consumed them, and the automated defenses simply eliminate anyone who gets too close to witness their extinction and embarrassment at having destroyed such a promising civilization. Veshtari's mandibles clicked in disagreement as she manipulated the holographic controls to zoom in on the border regions where automated monitoring stations had picked up strange readings over the decades since humanity had gone silent and stopped responding to any attempts at communication. Then explained the energy signatures. She challenged, pulling up data streams that showed power outputs consistent with billions of active fusion reactors and antimatter generators, operating at scales that suggested a thriving and expanding civilization rather than a dead one. Explain that terraforming operations are long-range sensors, detect on previously lifeless worlds within their space, and the massive construction projects that our instruments register even from this distance. The council chamber erupted in chirps, clicks, whistles, and translated protests as delegates argued among themselves about the wisdom of mounting yet another expedition into human space when all previous attempts had ended in mysterious disappearances without a trace. The Mandari representative, a crystalline being whose thoughts manifested as harmonic resonances in the chamber's acoustics, chimed in with a sound like wind through crystal caves that the translators rendered as cautious agreement with the concern that perhaps humanity should be left alone. But what if they're building weapons? Veshtari pressed, playing on the council's deepest fears about unknown civilizations developing unknown technologies in isolation from galactic oversight and regulation. What if they're preparing an invasion fleet and we're giving them centuries to perfect their war machine while we debate and hesitate? That got their attention in a way that scientific curiosity never could, because every species in the council chamber had evolved past their own violent tendencies only after experiencing the horrors of total war, and they projected those same developmental stages onto humanity. The vote took 3 standard cycles of debate and political maneuvering before Veshtari finally secured approval for a joint expedition that would include representatives and warships from 5 major galactic powers to ensure that no single species could claim whatever discoveries awaited them. The Kalathi supremacy contributed to flagship unyielding resolve, a dreadnought-class vessel bristling with plasma cannons and protected by shields that could withstand direct hits from stellar coronas without sustaining damage to its triple-hulled structure. The Vexians sent the luminous thought, a scientific vessel that looked more like a work of art than a spaceship with its translucent biological hull and gardens. visible through its membrane-like walls that pulsed with the thoughts of its crew. The Mandari crystal ships sang through space on harmonic drives that manipulated gravitational frequencies. The Ixtal brought their antimatter-powered destroyers, and the Krivani added their legendary stealth frigates that could hide from almost any sensor system in the known galaxy. 5 species, 12 ships, over 8,000 crew members united in their determination to finally answer the question that had haunted the galaxy for 3 centuries and discover what had happened to humanity. After they had withdrawn behind their borders, the fleet gathered at the edge of human space at coordinates that marked the official boundary that humanity had declared 300 years ago, and beyond which no non-human ship had ever returned from after crossing that invisible liner. Veshtari stood on the bridge of the unyielding resolve and stared at the view screen, showing nothing but empty space and distant stars that looked the same as stars anywhere else in the galaxy, with no indication of the mysteries that awaited them. All ships report ready, her tactical officer announced, with all 4 of his eyes focused on the fleet coordination displays that showed green indicators across the entire expeditionary force. Begin recording everything, Veshtari ordered, knowing that if they somehow became the 328th disappearance, at least they could leave behind data streams that might give future expeditions some clue about what happened to them. The fleet crossed the border together in a coordinated jump that would have been impossible for less advanced civilizations to execute with such precision across multiple vessel types and drive systems simultaneously. Immediately, every sensor on every ship went completely insane with alerts and warnings and detections that couldn't possibly be real because the readings suggested they had jumped into the middle of a mega-civilization that spanned hundreds of star systems, thousands of energy signatures. The sensor operator reported with confusion evident in his voice as he tried to make sense of the overwhelming data flooding his instruments. Orbital stations, planetary installations, ship traffic, communication networks, all operating at levels that suggest a population in the hundreds of billions at minimum. Veshtari felt her crests flatten against her skull in shock because humanity had numbered barely 8 billion when they had made first contact and retreated, which meant they had somehow increased their numbers by orders of magnitude while completely isolated from the rest of the galaxy. Focus scans on the nearest inhabited system, she commanded, pushing aside her shock to focus on gathering intelligence about what humanity had become during their long isolation. The fleet's combined sensor arrays painted a picture of a garden world that registered as perfectly terraformed with Earth-standard atmosphere and temperature, and vast cities visible from orbit, along with agricultural zones and industrial complexes, hailing on all frequencies. The communications officer announced, after following standard first contact protocols, that the galaxy had refined over millions of years of encountering new civilizations. Silence answered them, except for the background hum of automated systems and power grids and transportation networks that suggested a functioning civilization with millions of inhabitants going about their daily lives. No response to hails. Communications reported after cycling through every known method of establishing contact, including mathematical sequences and universal greetings. But we're detecting automated systems that are clearly aware of our presence and tracking our movements. Veshtari made the decision that would change everything for her and her crew, and possibly for the entire galaxy, depending on what they discovered on the surface of that eerily silent world. Prepare landing parties, she ordered. We're going down there to find out what happened to the humans. The landing craft descended through perfectly clear skies that had been engineered for optimal weather patterns, and Veshtari watched through the viewport as the city below grew larger and more detailed with every passing moment of their approach. To the surface, everything looked wrong in a way that made her combat instincts scream warnings, even though there was no visible threat because cities should be chaotic and messy with traffic and construction and the accumulated debris of daily life. This city looked like a museum piece, with streets so clean they gleamed in the sunlight and buildings maintained in perfect condition without a single broken window or graffiti mark or any sign of the wear that civilizations inevitably accumulated. Landing craft set down in what appeared to be a central plaza surrounded by towers that reached toward the sky, with architectural designs that blended form and function in ways that suggested human aesthetics had evolved considerably during their isolation. Veshariel led her team out of the craft with weapons ready, but not raised, because they were scientists and diplomats first, and soldiers only if the situation demanded it, though her tactical training made her scan for threats constantly. The silence hit her immediately, because cities should be noisy with voices and vehicles and construction and life. But this place was silent, except for the gentle hum of automated systems maintaining the infrastructure around them. Scan for life signs. She ordered her science officer, a Vexian named Lumara, whose bioluminescent patterns showed concern mixed with fascination at the sterile perfection surrounding them. No biological signatures within scanning range, Lumara reported after consulting her instruments that should have detected anything from bacteria to complex multicellular organisms across a radius of several kilometers. The city is completely empty of organic life. They spread out in teams to investigate different sections of the city while maintaining communication links and sharing data about what they discovered in the abandoned but perfectly maintained human habitation. The residential districts contain homes with furniture and decorations and personal items that suggested people had lived there recently, except for the complete absence of those people or any indication of where they had gone. Veshtari entered one house that appeared to belong to a family based on the different-sized clothing and toys scattered in rooms that suggested children had played there. Before vanishing along with their parents, a meal sat on the dining table, partially eaten with food that should have rotted decades ago, but instead had been perfectly preserved by some automated system that maintained the house exactly as it had been when the inhabitants disappeared. Commander, you need to see this, came the voice of her tactical officer over the communication link with an urgency that made Veshtari leave the disturbing scene of the abandoned family home. She found her team gathered in front of a massive wall made of black stone that had been polished to a mirror finish and covered in names etched in precise letters that reflected the light. Millions of names, perhaps billions, covering a memorial wall that stretched for what looked like kilometers in both directions, with dates beside each name that indicated they had all died on the same day. The departure, Lumara translated from the human script above the wall of names, using translation matrices to decode the language that humanity had used 3 centuries ago. When they had made first contact, Veshtari ran a clawed hand over the names and felt the precise etching that spoke of care and remembrance for every single individual listed on this monument to mass death. What could kill billions simultaneously? She wondered aloud while her mind raced through possibilities from plague to war to some kind of technological catastrophe that had consumed an entire world's population. Her team spread out along the memorial and discovered plaques that explained in simple terms what had happened to the humans of this world, though the explanations raised more questions than they answered. The people had departed by choice as part of something called the transition, that the plaques describe as humanity's next evolutionary step beyond biological existence into forms that didn't require physical bodies. Veshtari felt her crest rise in skepticism, because civilizations didn't just collectively decide to abandon their bodies and transcend into energy beings, or whatever the plaques were suggesting had happened. There's a museum, another team member reported from further into the city, where a large building sat with doors that opened automatically as the away team approached its entrance. The museum contained humanity's history displayed in holographic exhibits and preserved artifacts that trace their evolution from primitive tool users to spacefaring civilization in what seemed like an impossibly short time from Erishari. Walked through exhibits showing human wars, where they had nearly destroyed themselves multiple times but always pulled back from the brink and rebuilt stronger than before. She saw their first fumbling steps into space and their colonization of their home system and their dreams of reaching the stars that had driven them to develop faster than light. Travel through sheer determination. The exhibit showed first contact with the Galactic Council and the wonder in human eyes as they realized they weren't alone in the universe, followed by their quiet withdrawal after some event that the museum didn't fully explain. Commander Lumara called from the final exhibit hall. "You need to see this immediately." Veshtari entered a vast chamber, dominated by a holographic projection of what she initially thought was decorative art until she realized she was looking at humanity's home system rendered in real time with data feeds showing current status. Every planet had been transformed beyond recognition, with Mars covered in vegetation and oceans where historical records said there should be desert and carbon dioxide atmosphere. Moons of Jupiter were wrapped in orbital rings and connected by elevator cables that stretched between them, creating a network of habitats that housed populations larger than most galactic civilizations. The asteroid belt had been converted into a lattice of stations and habitats, with every significant rock hosting industrial facilities or living spaces or research outposts connected by transport tubes. Venus had been completely restructured with mirrors in orbit to cool it and massive atmospheric processors that were slowly converting its toxic clouds into breathable air for future colonization. Mercury was being actively mined by machines that harvested its metal-rich core while somehow maintaining the planet's structural integrity through force fields that Veshtar's scientific understanding said shouldn't be possible. And Earth, humanity's birth world, the cradle of their civilization and the planet they had evolved on over millions of years, was completely encased in layers of orbital rings that blocked out the stars. How many humans would this infrastructure support? Veshtari asked quietly while her mind tried to comprehend the scale of construction and engineering that this system represented. Trillions. Lumara answered after running calculations on the visible habitats and their probable population densities. Perhaps tens of trillions if they've developed high-density living solutions. The hologram zoomed out to show other star systems within human space, and each one showed similar levels of development with terraformed worlds and orbital constructions, and populations that dwarfed anything the Galactic Council civilizations had achieved. Veshtari's combat training screamed at her that this was a threat, because no civilization should be this powerful and this advanced without the rest of the galaxy knowing about it and preparing defenses. "We need to report this to the Council immediately," she said, while already knowing that her report would cause panic and possibly trigger military mobilization across the galaxy. But then the hologram changed without anyone touching the controls, and new text appeared in perfect Kalathi script, as if the museum knew exactly who was viewing it and what language they spoke. "Welcome, visitors." The text read in letters of light hanging in the air. "We've been expecting you and are pleased that you've come to understand what we've become during our isolation from galactic society." Veshtari reached for her weapon instinctively before realizing that if humanity had been monitoring them since they entered the system, then they could have eliminated the expedition at any point. "Please proceed to the coordinates being transmitted to your ships." The message continued. "We are eager to meet you in person and answer the questions that have brought you into our space after so many years." The message hadn't come through normal communication channels, which would have been concerning enough, but instead it had appeared directly in the quantum processors of every ship in the fleet, simultaneously without triggering any security protocols. Veshtari stood on the bridge of the unyielding resolve and stared at the coordinates that had been transmitted to their Navigation systems with a precision that suggested humanity knew the exact position of every vessel in her fleet. Analysis of the contact method. She demanded from her communications officer, who looked disturbed by whatever he had discovered about how the message had been delivered to them. They didn't hack our systems in any conventional sense, he explained while pulling up data that showed the message had simply appeared in their computer cores as if it had always been there. It's like they wrote directly to our quantum storage without interacting with our systems at all, which shouldn't be physically possible according to any model of information theory we understand. The coordinates led to a point in space between star systems where their sensors showed absolutely nothing except the background radiation of the universe and the distant light of stars. Could be a trap, her tactical officer suggested, with his hand hovering over the weapons control systems that could unleash devastating firepower if the fleet came under attack. If they wanted us dead, we'd already be dead, Vishtari replied with the cold logic of someone who had studied warfare for her entire adult life and recognized when an opponent held overwhelming advantage. They've been tracking us since we crossed the border, and probably before that. The fleet jumped to the coordinates together and emerged in what their sensors still insisted was empty space, except that their visual displays showed something very different from what their instruments detected. A structure the size of a small moon hung in space before them with architecture that blended organic curves with geometric precision in ways that hurt to look at because the design suggested dimensions that three-dimensional beings weren't meant to perceive. Sensors still reading nothing, the science officer reported with confusion evident in every word. But visual confirmation of massive structure directly ahead, which means either our sensors are being fooled, or the structure exists in some state that our instruments can't measure. A docking guide appeared on their navigation displays, showing precisely where each ship in the fleet should position itself along the structure's surface, which was marked with landing bays that hadn't been visible a moment before. Vishtari made the decision to proceed because turning back now would accomplish nothing except confirming their fear and ignorance to whoever was watching them from within that impossible structure. The landing bay swallowed her shuttle with walls that shifted color like oil on water and gravity that oriented itself to whatever surface she walked on, regardless of the structure's actual orientation in space. She led a delegation of officers and scientists from all 5 species toward a doorway that opened onto a chamber decorated in a style that suggested human aesthetics, but elevated to art forms that transcended merely functional architecture. Humans were waiting for them in a room with walls that showed views of space that couldn't possibly be real because they displayed perspectives from multiple locations simultaneously without any visual distortion. Vishtari had expected warriors or politicians or scientists in advanced suits bristling with technology that would demonstrate humanity's superiority over the primitive galactic civilizations. Instead, she found 5 humans in simple clothing that could have come from any period in their history, with no visible weapons or technology or augmentation that would explain their civilization's impossible achievements. The lead human was an elderly man with gray hair and wrinkles that spoke of age in a universe where most advanced civilizations had conquered biological aging centuries ago. "Welcome," he said in perfect Kalathi, without any translation device visible on his person or in the room. "I'm Ambassador Chun, and these are my colleagues who represent different aspects of human civilization." Vishtari's diplomatic training took over. Despite her shock at the casual display of technology that could translate languages in real time without devices and create structures that sensors couldn't detect, "I am Commander Vishtari of the Kalathi Supremacy," she replied with formal precision while her mind raced to analyze every detail of the humans before her. "I speak for this expedition and demand answers about the fate of the 327 ships that entered your space and never returned." Chun's expression shifted to something that looked like genuine regret, mixed with understanding of why the aliens before him would be angry and frightened by centuries of unexplained disappearances. They weren't destroyed, he said simply while gesturing to holographic displays that appeared in the air, showing images of ships and crews that Veshtari recognized from historical records. They're living in comfortable habitats while we debated whether the galaxy was ready for contact with what we've become. The displays showed aliens from dozens of species living in what appeared to be paradise, environments tailored to their biological needs, with some individuals who should have been dead for centuries. According to the timestamps, you've been holding them prisoner for hundreds of years, Veshtari said, with her crests rising in anger at the casual admission of kidnapping thousands of sentient beings. We've been protecting them, Chun corrected gently, while pulling up more displays showing aliens who looked healthy and content, with families and lives that suggested they weren't suffering under human captivity, and protecting you from knowledge that we weren't sure your civilizations could handle responsibly. Lumora pulsed with patterns that indicated her desire to speak, and Chun nodded to her as if understanding Dexian bioluminescence without needing translation. What knowledge could possibly justify imprisoning innocent explorers? She demanded while her colors shifted through anger and confusion at the humans' apparent lack of understanding about the severity of their crimes. Jun's expression became serious in a way that made Veshtari's combat instincts activate because she recognized the look of someone about to deliver news that would change everything. The knowledge of what humanity has become, he said quietly, and what that means for the rest of the galaxy, whether you're ready for it or not. He gestured, and the room around them vanished to be replaced with views of human space that showed the true scale of what they had built during 3 centuries of isolation from galactic society stars, being mined for their hydrogen and helium, while maintaining the stability of their planetary systems through gravitational manipulation that shouldn't be possible with any known technology wormhole. Networks connecting every human system with instantaneous travel that bypassed the normal limitations of faster-than-light drives that still required time to cross interstellar distances, ring walls and Dyson swarms, and stellar engines that moved entire star systems according to some grand design that the displays didn't fully explain. Weapons platforms hidden throughout human space that could unmake matter at the quantum level by severing the fundamental forces that held atoms together. We transcended, Chen explained while the displays showed humans interfacing directly with computer systems and transferring their consciousness between biological bodies and digital substrates, not into energy beings or higher dimensions, but into a post-scarcity civilization that has solved every material problem and most spiritual ones. Veshtari watched billions of humans living in virtual paradises that were indistinguishable from reality, with the ability to experience any life or adventure or dream, while their biological bodies waited in storage. Your gods, she whispered, with her crests flattening in submission to beings who commanded power that could reshape reality according to their desires. We're humans who got lucky and smart and determined to survive, Chum replied with a smile that held sadness beneath the pride. But we're not gods, because gods don't get scared. He pulled up new displays showing the edge of human space where strange signals originated from the darkness, beyond the galactic rim where no civilization had ever successfully explored. We stopped expanding, Chum said quietly, because we found something out there that terrifies us enough to make us reconsider everything we thought we knew about the universe. Chum led them through corridors that seemed to fold space itself, because they walked for minutes but traveled distances that should have taken hours at normal speeds through a structure that was impossibly larger inside than outside. They emerged in a chamber overlooking what appeared to be an entire world contained within the station, with forests and rivers and cities visible below, though the geometry made Veshtari's head hurt when she tried to understand how this space could exist. The Previous expeditions. Chum said while gesturing to the paradise world below. 327 ships, carrying over 40,000 individuals from dozens of species, who came seeking answers, just as you did. Veshtari pressed against the transparent wall and saw aliens from species she recognized walking through gardens and living in homes and raising families in an environment that had been perfectly tailored to support multiple biological requirements simultaneously. They've been here for decades, some for centuries. Chung continued while pulling up individual profiles showing aliens who should have aged and died long ago, but instead looked healthy and young. We've maintained their health and given them everything they could need while we studied them and decided what to do. You had no right, Veshtari said with anger, making her voice harsh and her crests fully extended in threat display that Chun accepted without flinching or showing any sign of intimidation. We had every right to protect ourselves from civilizations that might respond to our existence with fear and violence. Chun replied calmly while showing historical records of galactic wars and genocides that demonstrated the capacity for coordinated destruction. Your own species has exterminated 7 lesser civilizations in the past millennium alone. The accusation hit Veshtari like a physical blow because it was true, even though her people justified those extinctions as necessary for galactic security. Against potentially dangerous developing civilizations, what did you do to them? Lumara asked while her patterns showed concern for the well-being of the imprisoned explorers below. We gave them paradise and the truth, Chen answered while transporting them instantly to the surface of the habitat world without any sensation of movement. And then we gave them a choice. They materialized in a plaza, where aliens from multiple species were gathering for what appeared to be some kind of community event with markets and performances and children playing together despite coming from biologically incompatible species. An elderly Galathi approached with movements that spoke of age beyond anything Veshtari had seen in her species because her people typically chose rejuvenation treatments long before reaching such advanced years. Commander, the ancient alien said in the formal dialect of Galathi military officers from 3 centuries ago, I am Fleet Master Keshva of the first expedition sent to investigate human space. Veshtari's historical training provided recognition of the name because Keshva had been a legendary officer whose disappearance had sparked reforms in how the supremacy approached first contact situations. You've been here for 300 years, she said while calculating the implications of humans maintaining alien captives for such extended periods. I've been here by choice for 297 years. Keshava corrected with a smile that showed contentment rather than the trauma of long imprisonment. The first 3 years, I spent demanding to be released and threatening humanity with military retaliation. He gestured for them to follow him through the habitat while explaining what had happened after his expedition had been captured and brought to this place. The humans had shown them everything without filters or deception about what they had become during their isolation and the technologies they had developed through their characteristic refusal to accept limitations. They can manipulate matter at the quantum level, Keshva explained while showing them a fabricator that could create any object by assembling atoms in precise configurations. Energy is essentially unlimited through their fusion and antimatter systems combined with direct stellar harvesting. Veshtari watched a human child create a flower from nothing by using a handheld device that assembled carbon and hydrogen and other elements into living tissue that immediately began growing. They've solved aging and death, Keshva continued while leading them to a medical facility where aliens and humans alike came for treatments that could repair any injury or illness, not through crude biological manipulation, but by understanding and repairing the fundamental processes that cause cellular degradation. Lumara examined the medical equipment with her scientific training, making her ask detailed Questions about the mechanisms that Chun answered with casual explanations of technologies that would take galactic civilization centuries to develop consciousness transfer. Chun said, while showing them pods where individuals could upload their minds into computer substrates or download into new biological bodies. Complete personality preservation with the ability to return to physical form whenever desired. They visited factories that produced goods without labor and farms that grew food without farmers and cities that maintained themselves through networked artificial intelligences that managed every system. Post-scarcity? Veshtari said, while understanding finally clicked into place about what humanity had achieved. You've eliminated the competition for resources that drives all conflict, not just post-scarcity. Chun corrected while showing them the infrastructure that connected human space into a single coordinated civilization. Post-separation, because we've merged biological and digital existence into something that transcends both. He took them to the edge of the habitat and showed them the view beyond, where human space stretched out in a web of light connecting thousands of star systems. Wormhole gates allowed instantaneous travel between any 2 points in human territory, with travel times measured in minutes rather than the weeks or months required by conventional faster-than-light drives computational substrates. The size of moons ran simulations and virtual worlds where billions of uploaded minds lived lives of their choosing while their biological bodies waited in storage. Stellar lifting operations extracted matter from stars to build more habitats and ships and infrastructure without depleting the stars themselves or disrupting their solar systems. How? Veshtari asked, simply because the question encompassed everything about how humanity had achieved in centuries what should have taken millions of years of development. We refuse to accept limits, Chun answered with pride evident in his voice and expression. When physics said something was impossible, we found loopholes, and when biology constrained us, we transcended it. He showed them the weapons next because honesty demanded that they understand humanity's full capabilities, including their capacity for destruction. Quantum unmaking devices that could sever the strong nuclear force across entire regions of space, causing matter to simply cease existing at the atomic level. Stellar igniters that could cause stars to go supernova or collapse into black holes through carefully orchestrated manipulation of fusion processes. Relativistic kinetic weapons that accelerated asteroids to near light speed, creating impacts that could sterilize planets or shatter moons. We could sweep across the galaxy like a wave, Chun said quietly while the weapons demonstrations played out in holographic displays. We could conquer or destroy every civilization within a century using technologies that you have no defense against. Veshtari felt her crest flatten completely in submission to the overwhelming power that humanity commanded, because resistance would be as futile as fighting a star. But you don't, she said while trying to understand why beings with such power would choose isolation over domination. Chun's expression became serious as he pulled up new displays, showing signals from beyond the galactic rim where something vast and incomprehensible lurked in the darkness between galaxies. Because we found something that scares us, he admitted with fear evident despite humanity's godlike capabilities. Something that made us realize we needed to grow up before we could grow out. Chun transported the delegation back to the observation chamber with a thought that triggered the station systems to move them through space without any sensation of transition between locations. The displays now showed the edge of human space, where automated monitoring stations pointed their sensors outward toward the void between galaxies where no stars shone and no civilizations had ever successfully explored. 70 years ago, we detected the first signals, Chun began while pulling up recordings of electromagnetic patterns that didn't match any natural phenomenon. Strange broadcasts and frequencies that shouldn't exist coming from a source approximately 2 million light-years beyond the galactic Rim, Veshtari studied the signal patterns with her tactical training making. Recognized that these weren't random noise, but structured information encoded in ways that suggested intelligence behind the transmission. We sent probes. Chun continued while showing sleek vessels that accelerated to relativistic speeds using drives that folded space around them. Automated scouts equipped with our best sensors and protected by our strongest shields. The fate of those probes played out in the recordings with their last transmissions, showing something that made Veshtari's combat instincts scream warnings. Structures the size of galaxies moving through the void with purpose and coordination that suggested they were parts of a single vast organism or machine. The probes were destroyed within seconds of detecting the structures. Chun said, while the recording showed energy weapons that unmade matter more efficiently than humanity's own quantum devices. Not captured or studied, but eliminated as threats despite being purely observational platforms. Lumara pulsed with patterns that indicated scientific fascination, mixed with the primal fear that all intelligent beings felt when confronting the truly unknown. What are they? She asked, while examining the partial data that the probes had transmitted before their destruction. We don't know. Chun admitted with the honesty of someone who had accepted the limits of even advanced knowledge. Machines built by a long dead civilization or living megastructures are something else entirely that we don't have concepts to describe. He showed them humanity's analysis and projections about the structures which suggested they were moving toward the galaxy at speeds that seemed impossible for objects of such immense size. They'll reach the galactic rim in approximately 1,000 years at current velocity. Chen explained while showing probability curves and threat assessments. Maybe sooner if they can accelerate, or maybe much later if they're not actually targeting our galaxy specifically. Veshtari did the tactical calculations automatically and came to the same conclusion that humanity had obviously reached decades ago. We can't fight them alone, she said, while understanding finally why humanity had allowed this expedition to reach them. After centuries of isolation, we can't fight them at all with current technology. Chun corrected while showing simulations of humanity's most advanced weapons having negligible effect on structures that large and that advanced. But maybe we can defend against them if we have 1,000 years to prepare and if we're not alone. The implication hung in the air between the human ambassador and the alien delegation who had come seeking answers and instead found questions that threatened the entire galaxy. You want the Galactic Council to unite with humanity, Veshtari said, while her political training recognized the magnitude of what Chun was proposing. We want every sapient being in this galaxy to survive what's coming. Chun replied with passion that spoke of genuine care for civilizations that humanity could easily dominate or ignore. We don't need your resources because we have post-scarcity, and we don't need your territory because we have more space than we can use. What do you need? Lumara asked while her pattern shifted to indicate she was already considering the possibilities of galactic cooperation on an unprecedented scale. We need you to stop thinking of yourselves as separate species competing for limited resources. Chun answered while showing images of the galactic civilizations with their territorial disputes and trade conflicts. We need you to start thinking of yourselves as one civilization facing a threat that doesn't care about your political boundaries. He pulled up projections showing what would happen if the structures reached the galaxy. While the civilizations were still fragmented and unprepared, species would fall one by one as the threat swept through the galaxy, eliminating resistance with overwhelming technological superiority. But other projections showed different outcomes. If humanity shared their technology and the galaxy united under a common defense framework, you're offering to uplift us, Veshtari said, while recognizing the historical significance of this moment. Because technological uplifting was the dream of every developing civilization. We're offering partnership, Chung corrected while showing humans and aliens working together. on projects that combine biological diversity with technological advancement. You bring perspectives and creativity that we've lost in our isolation, and we bring technologies that will help you survive. Keshva stepped forward from where he had been observing the exchange with the patience of someone who had lived centuries and learned to see beyond immediate concerns. I chose to stay here after the humans showed me the truth, he said to Veshtari directly, not because I was afraid to return home, but because I understood that what I could contribute here was more valuable than anything I could do back in the Supremacy. Veshtari looked at the ancient officer who had become something more than Kalathi during his time with humanity, and saw the contentment that came from purpose beyond personal or species glory. What happens to us? She asked Chun while gesturing to her crew and the other species representatives who had accompanied this expedition. You choose. Chen answered simply while creating holographic displays showing 3 options with equal clarity and honesty. You can return to the Galactic Council with full knowledge of what humanity has become and what threatens the galaxy. He explained while showing the first option. We'll provide evidence and data that will convince your governments of the threat and the necessity of cooperation. The second option appeared, showing the expedition members remaining in human space to learn and grow and prepare for the coming crisis. Or you can stay here and help us prepare while we slowly begin contact with your civilizations through diplomatic channels and technology sharing programs. The third option showed something that made Veshtari's crests rise in surprise, because it involved humans returning with the expedition to face the Galactic Council directly. Or we come with you now and present ourselves openly to your governments with offers of alliance and shared defense against the threat that neither we nor you can face alone. Veshtari looked at her crew and saw the same mixture of fear and wonder and determination that she felt in her own chest. 3 centuries of mystery solved in a day with the revelation that humanity hadn't destroyed themselves or hidden from weakness, but had transcended into something that could save or doom the galaxy. Depending on the choices made in this moment, she thought about her people's pride and their military traditions, and their conviction that strength meant dominance over others rather than cooperation with equals. She thought about the petty, territorial disputes that consumed galactic politics while an existential threat approached from the darkness beyond the rim. She thought about Chun's words about thinking of themselves as one civilization rather than competing species, and realized that humanity had already learned this lesson through whatever crucible had forced them to transcend. What do we need to do? Veshtari asked while making the decision that would change everything for her species and possibly for the entire Galaxan smiled with relief and hope and determination that had carried humanity through their isolation and would now guide them back to galactic society. First, we need you to stop thinking of yourselves as separate species, competing for limited resources, he said while pulling up plans that showed cooperation frameworks and technology sharing schedules. Start thinking of yourselves as one civilization facing an infinite universe that contains wonders and horrors beyond our current comprehension. We'll help, he continued while showing the transition plans that would integrate galactic civilizations with human technology over decades rather than forcing overnight transformation. We've gotten very good at doing the impossible when survival demands. Veshtari signaled her crew to stand down from combat readiness and instead prepare for something far more challenging than warfare, peace and cooperation and unity, in the face of threats that made their previous conflicts seem as insignificant as children fighting over toys. My fleet stays, she announced while making the decision that her government might consider treason, but that she knew was necessary. We learn and we help prepare, and we become ambassadors for this alliance. The other species representatives nodded agreement, with their own gestures and signals that indicated commitment to this new path. Chun nodded with satisfaction at allies gained and the beginning of something that could save the galaxy. If they had enough time, send the messages to your governments, he said, while opening communication channels that would allow them to report everything they had learned. Tell them human it.